me as Danny. I'm an Iranian-Canadian journalist with City News in Toronto, and I'll be moderating the panel today.
The Iranian women-led revolution started with the murder of a young, innocent, and law-abiding girl and the police custody. Today, we are gathered here to understand the dynamics behind this revolution. How did it start? What were the roots? And where is it going?
I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union because the Czech Republic is holding the presidency, 6-month presidency of the European Union, and that's also how it works here in Toronto. The protection of human rights around the world and elimination of violence against women is very important and ongoing task for the entire European Union. People in Iran, as anywhere else, have the right to peaceful protest.
Women in Iran live under a gender apartheid state. So that means they're being segregated at universities. Men and women at lunchrooms are segregated. Sports stadiums, women are not allowed to enter football stadiums to watch the football matches. In fact, we campaign strongly for FIFA to boycott the national team so that it would send a clear message that the stance, what FIFA represents, which is supposed to be inclusivity, is not what's represented in Iran. Women are legally treated as second-class citizens under the law. Their value is written, is enshrined in the law as being worth half of a man. The revolution in Iran was an anti-woman revolution. And that's why it is a gender apartheid. And certainly in education, when we see what young girls are taught to be for their aspirations, they need to be, after the revolution, the litmus test became as how good they would be in a family, not as how could they, successful they could be as human beings.
Many people forget, including journalists, that the first demonstration against the Islamic Republic was done on March 8, 1979 by women. Women who were completely dismissed by Iranian political groups at the time. There are people who can testify who were members of these groups, some of them here. Unfortunately, I see that most of the people here are under the age of 50, so that it doesn't concern them. And this agency actually against patriarchy in Iran, against male chauvinism, against dictatorship, was already working on March 8, 1979. So why, I think that we are witnessing something very important today, which I will call it the first, I'm not the only one actually, but I did write about it, the first feminist revolution of the Middle East. And we saw that this first feminist revolution of the Middle East can have a huge impact on the Arab states, Arab societies. We saw it in Beirut actually, women getting out and giving the same slogans, women, freedom, and life and freedom. And we saw it also in Afghanistan. So what is the most important thing which has happened is that, first of all, I think that Iranian men, they realized that Iran, actually the agency, I would say, the political agency in Iran is guided mostly by women. And I think that it has to do with what I will call, fortunately, if it happens, a feminization of Iranian politics. Feminization of Iranian politics is actually bringing in new values into Iranian politics, which have been very male-oriented and always around the concepts like domination, authority. And we can see that this movement, because it's led by a lot of young women and a lot of women, there is a critique of authority, a very severe critique of authority. So this is what has happened. I think that we have to go to the, it's a structural difference which changes also. It's not just what we see at the, it's not just what we see in the news, it's also what's really happening in the Iranian society.
To your question, why is this resonating to the extent it is? I think there are a number of factors that play in. First of all, I think regardless of where we are, where we live, women are perceived to be the weaker sex. And particularly in the Middle East and in other parts of the world, this perception has been institutionalized by laws, by behaviors, and by attitudes. As we well know, as both the Nazarenes have pointed out, women are second-class citizens in Iran. They cannot wear what they want to wear. They are not allowed to practice in occupations, even though their standard of education is on par with men, and yet their unemployment rate is double that of their male counterparts. They're not allowed to travel, they don't have property rights, they relinquish their rights to their children on divorce, and so on and so forth. So there is a perception, I think, that women have been subjugated, and because they have risen up with such courage and such resilience, without fear of the consequences. Let's remember all the women who are in prison and who are being tortured and subjected to all kinds of horrors. Let's remember, and when oppression speaks out in this way, I think it resonates with the world. And it's resonating particularly in Canada because we have a feminist agenda, and this is a feminist revolution. And I believe these kinds of conversations create the bridge between them and us, because after all, we are all women. And I think that's one of the reasons it resonates, because of the commonality of the experience of being perceived. I'm quite sure that the women on this panel are testament to the fact that perceptions can be so wrong, that we are perceived to be the weaker sex.
As all of you know, for the 20th century, throughout the 20th century, when we look at Iranian history, it is a dance between tradition and modernity. And I can tell you, as all of you know full well, that when the constitutional revolution first happened in Iran, at the start of the 20th century, in 1907, women figured prominently in that movement. So, as Nazanin Ansari was saying, it is terrible to watch, to see what has happened to women in Iran. And this has really been against the current of developments that were taking place before. For example, it would be interesting to know that in our countries we talk about inclusive growth. We talk about empowering women. But let's not forget that the first country that had a minister for women's affairs was France in 1973, and the second country that followed in their footsteps was Iran in 1974. So what we have seen has really been heart-wrenching. And as has been pointed out by the previous speakers, gender apartheid has been a part of the DNA of the Islamic Republic since the first day they took office. And it was women who were the first group that stood up to the regime in 1979 and 1980. Now, speaking about all of the incredible support that the international community has garnered, and of course it's thanks to many of you and to the Iranian diaspora in various countries around the world. But the good part is we can stand assured that the international community stands with the people of Iran. Why do I say this? You have all seen that various countries have adopted sanctions against the Iranian regime. In addition to that, we have also witnessed a number of different initiatives in international fora. 2 weeks ago, for the first time in its history, the Human Rights Council in Geneva had an emergency session, recognizing that we all have to keep our eyes on Iran and the terrible things unfolding there. So now we have an accountability mechanism that various countries support it, to make sure that we are vigilant insofar as developments in Iran.
Now what we're seeing are not just protests. It is a full-scale revolution because it is 43 years of repression spilling out on the streets. It's all of these factions. It's because of economics. It's because of students who feel so repressed that they can't just lead normal lives like we see here, university students. They can't, have mingle with their partners on the streets. So the difference is that it's a culmination of people and hardships coming together, and the belief, and also just sheerly being fed up. And the people of Iran right now, they're sacrificing their life, their everything, because they say that I'd rather not be alive than to live under the shackles of this Islamic Republic. They're willing to sacrifice everything for their freedom and democracy. So this also is different from before. Now, on the outside of Iran, it's also the belief by the Iranian diaspora. When I was organizing rallies 17 years ago, maybe 200, 300 people would show up. Not 50,000 people on the streets of Toronto, 100,000 people showing up on the streets of Berlin. It's people are ready for this. There is no turning back. The regime is not going to last. I'm not saying it's going to fall tomorrow, but the people believe, and now politicians are starting to believe. But I think the next step, what you asked, what they still need, they need politicians, and I know this because my husband was a politician and I've been around political circles, they need to know that there is something in place that if this regime falls and there's a power vacuum and there's chaos, who will take over? Are there legitimate people and leaders to be able to take on that role? And the answer is yes. Inside every prison, you will find Iran's top leaders.
How is this different than other movements that we've seen in the last 43 years? I think in terms of scale, scope, and demands, this is very, very different. In terms of scale and scope, we know that more than 150 cities have participated in these protests. That is something that has never happened before. We also know that these protests have been going on for over 3 months now. So that is incredibly unprecedented as well. But the most important aspect of this is that the demands have changed. As you know, the last 43 years, it's been a tortured path. And I can assure you that Iranians have truly tried everything to push back the government, make sure that they can live up to their incredible potential. But it is quite obvious, 43 years later, that the Islamic regime is not amenable to reform. So the second question then is the international community supportive? Are Western capitals supportive? Well, I'm here to say that for 5, 6, maybe 10 years now, Iranians have come to realize that to suggest that Iran has 2 different groups, one are reformers, the others are hardliners, Iranians have learned full well that that is a sham and that nothing ever improves in Iran. Not only does it not improve, but every year the regime has become more repressive. And now, over the course of the past 3 months, I can assure you that it is pretty obvious to me, it's palpable, that Western capitals realize that as well. They no longer look at Iran and say there were reformers, maybe we should try to fortify the reformers who are, marginally better than the hardliners. Those distinctions are no longer there. They no longer labor under the illusion that there are different factions within the regime. They have come to realize, they have come to learn, and that they have heard from Iranians that to suggest that there are two different wings to this regime is malarkey and that it's a sham. Thank you.
Well, I think that sanctions are important, and Canada can go further on the sanctions route. Just as one tangible example, last year I pushed through a law that was finally supported by the Liberal government, which enables the government of Canada not just to freeze the assets of corrupt foreign officials, and right now Canada has over 180 Iranian entities and over 160 Iranian individuals whose assets have been frozen in Canada. But that's where they are, frozen. It's dead money. It's no good to the victims. And now the government has the power to seize those assets and repurpose them in the context of Iran to human rights defenders in Iran. But as I know as a parliamentarian and as Ali well knows, government passes laws very often and then leaves them filed on the shelf. The time has come now for civil society and for people like us to urge the government of Canada to actualize and implement the law and ensure that the source of these assets is identified, the nature of these assets is identified, and that these assets are repurposed back in support of the feminist revolution.
And this is very important to get to the substance of the Iranian regime, because the Iranian regime is a totalitarian regime, and it's very important for our EU friends, people in Europe, in the United States, to understand that how you have to deal. They have dealt already during the Second World War with totalitarian regimes, Stalin in Russia, but especially Nazism. And we should not, I think we're among Canadians, and we should not self-congratulate ourselves by being civilized and being critical towards the Iranian regime, because this is not necessarily the case in many societies around the world. I live in India part of the year, and I see that the Iranian regime spends a lot of money to have the support of the Indian government. But the people of India, they are completely, I continue writing in the journals, but they ask me always a lot of questions about what is it, why is it not reformable? You have reformists in Iran, why they are not coming forward? And I try to make them understand that there's not enough media, and they don't go necessarily to the media that we go. And I try to make them understand the true nature of the Iranian regime. And so we have to make sure that we talk about what I call the apartheid moment of the Iranian regime, which is so important. Why? Because there is a comparison with South Africa. The comparison is that when the people like Mandela, ANC, and others, they needed the help of the world helped them. And this is where we are standing. And this is why it's so important, because they have to understand the true message which is coming out of Iran, the true message which is among the Iranians. So the Iranian regime, to answer your question very quickly also in relation to what I said, the Iranian regime is living now a crisis of legitimacy, complete crisis of legitimacy. But it's a regime of murder. It's a criminal regime. I say it's a mixture of organized crime and Spanish Inquisition. Something in between. People who are sitting here in front of you, many of them Iranians, they are not murderers. They cannot practice violence in the same way. We cannot practice violence in the same way as the Iranian regime. So that the people around the world, they should understand. And it's the same thing as it has happened in many other countries of the world when they were getting rid of their regimes, when they needed the help. And sanctions are not enough, I think. Because with such regimes, you cannot only have sanctions. You have to have more than that.
The transitional justice that started within the Iranian context in the past few years, especially with the 1988 massacre trial, the Baban trial, has been very instrumental in
raising awareness in legal circles, in international legal circles, human rights circles, and bringing justice and truth to the front. A lot of the information that we have now is thanks to all those people's tribunals that started a few years ago. But there is one difference between the apartheid regime of South Africa and the Islamic Republic. In the case of South Africa, the de Klerk government was party to this transitional justice, program or movement, whatever you want to call it. And it was taking place inside South Africa. So it was a civil rights movement. When it comes to Iran and the Islamic Republic, it is not. It is taking place outside of Iran and outside the parameters of what the Islamic Republic is allowing. So hopefully, looking forward, definitely probably the cases we had in Yugoslavia, for example, can be used as an example of the International Court of Justice. What will happen to Mr. Khamenei? I hope he can stand in the ICJ one day, and then I hope, as a punishment, he will have to listen to the pleas and the cries of all of the families of the victims of the Islamic Republic daily, so that his consciousness is awakened at some point. Because what he has done to that country and everything that has passed in the 43 years, the world has been awake. The cameras have been on Iran, but no one wanted to actually, admit it. So Nothing in here is talking about 17 years ago. I'm talking about 43 years ago. It's been an apartheid system since 43 years ago. But then, it's only now that the world has awoken. And I hope that justice will come to you.
The only tool that the Islamic Republic has in its playbook is repression. We have seen this for 43 years. And unfortunately, we have a world in which it is blighted by all these terrible regimes. But I truly don't know of a single one of these regimes which actually execute their country's leading athletes and their most popular musicians. I don't know of any other country that does that. Iran does that. We know that during the course of the past 3 months, they have thrown over 18,000 people in jail. So the scale with which the regime commits atrocities is on a scale which is very, very different than other countries. And it is a mafia state, as Rami was pointing out. So I have no doubt that given the bravery and the courage that we have seen from Iranians within, that this is the beginning of the end. But I hope that the end comes very, very soon, because it has broken all of our hearts. And I think Iranians have every right to have dignity and freedom.